Hi, I'm Angela H. Brown. I'm the Executive Director for Craft Lake City. The Craft Lake City Business Academy is taught for creatives by creatives. These business courses are led by established makers in the Salt Lake City art scene. You'll be learning tips, tricks, and trade secrets from their combined decades of experience. I hope you enjoy this class, and thank you so much for your support of Craft Lake City and Utah's creative community.
My name is Katie, and I am the creator of the brand Tragic Girls. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me and my business first, just to give you kind of an introduction. I also think it's kind of really important to know where people started, to know how they got to where they are. I think that's just like really grounding to know that people, started in the same place you are, and then, they reach some form of success in their business. So I went to the University of Utah. I started studying jazz music first, actually. I wasn't even gonna do art for, the longest time. I always knew I wanted to do something artistic with my life and my career. But I first kind of started in the direction of music. Um, and then sort of halfway through my degree, I decided to change to film and animation. So I always had that interest in artwork, but I felt that like getting a degree in film and animation might have been a more smart choice as far as my career and my future. Um, and I think that's something that like we as business owners have to deal with too. Like you have to, before starting your business, you might think like, oh, I should be doing like a career that will give me money and will be stable and all of this stuff. But I think just doing what I wanted and starting my own business is the best decision I ever made. And it's been hard. But you learn things along the way and you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I think it's just really fulfilling. So after I graduated, I did work in video editing for a long time. And I did that full time while I was drawing and sort of starting to start my business. So I would just, work a full like 40 hours a week, and then I would come home and just draw all night long. And then I think art for me really like was a way for me to express myself. Not only was it like a business thing, it was just like what it's what I use to express myself, because sometimes, it's hard finding the words to express yourself. Art was just like that for me. And then I wanted to really be able to turn it into sort of a business, and make that really my career. So I did that. And then in 2017 was really when I started working on my business. I signed up for a bunch of festivals during the summer so that I could sort of force myself to get out there and start, making my products, making things that I could sell. And that was the biggest motivation for me, was actually, signing up for these things that I needed to do in order to really start my business. And that gave me a goal and something to work for and something to get me getting my work out there. I actually was laid off from my video editing job like a year after I started or something like that. And at that point, I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to get another job. I'm going to just try to make this work. I'm going to try to start my business. And it was probably the best decision I've ever made. And, there's people who are like, you should really get a job. Like, what are you doing? What are you going to do with your life? But I'm really glad that I really tried to do this and make it work. And, if you really put in that effort, then you can really do it. You can. But during that time, I did work at several tattoo shops part-time, actually. So, sometimes it's hard to make all the ends meet while you're starting your business, but as long as you keep doing it, you might have to take some, part-time work or do freelance work or something, but it's definitely something that you can make a living doing. And then so when I first started, my style was kind of all over the place. And I wasn't the best at art. Like whenever you're trying to do something new, you got to start somewhere. So I have like these kind of crappy drawings of like zombie girls, and like I did, sort of like comic book black and white images, and then I also did like full on paintings, like pop art paintings. So I wasn't really focused on branding or anything like that at this point. I was just, drawing. That's all I was doing. But then as my work started to evolve, I started to focus more on the cohesive aspect of it, which I think is really important when you're starting your business. It's not something that everyone always thinks about, but I really think it's one of the most important things, is to just keep your brand, consistent, cohesive. It makes it a lot easier for people to recognize your brand and recognize who you are and what you're doing. So this is sort of where my style went to when I was really starting to think about that stuff. So I did, black and white ink drawings with just a little pop of color, but I tended to, stick with the same themes thematically too. So like I drew sad girls, and like I did a lot of comic book and horror stuff. So that's sort of where I was when I, started doing conventions and started really, putting my work online and all of that stuff. And now here we are today. So this is kind of what my art looks like now. I think it's a lot better than where I started. But that's just, again, keep working at it, keep doing what you're doing, and your, technical abilities will match up to where, you want your work to look. And so I've still kept, the same sort of comic book look to everything. I've added a lot more colors. And then I've stuck to a lot of the same themes. I still like the spooky stuff. And then I still like, drawing sad girls, drawing stuff about, what people are really feeling, like human emotion, all of that stuff that we all feel. But it's sort of hard to express sometimes. So that's what I really like to draw. And then when I did start, I was only doing prints really. When I, got my business going a little bit, I was able to add more things like t-shirts and pins and stuff like that, which is something I always wanted to do. But sometimes when you're starting out, you don't always have the means to do things like that. But, just working on everything, working on my branding, my business, and getting my name out there, I was eventually able to do, more things, and more opportunities came my way with designing t-shirts and stuff like that. So it's just something, your business grows and you're able to do more things like that. Branding. Branding can oftentimes be very vague, and it's kind of hard to define branding. But I like to think about it just as your identity as a business. That is what your business is. It is your products, it is your message, the messaging behind your brand, what you stand for, and it's the style of your products as well, what everything looks like. And then branding is really how you present all of that to the world. So you could think of it as a person, where your brand would be, your message could be what you think and how you feel as a person. Your style is just the clothes you wear, and then maybe your personality is the branding. That's how you show yourself to the world. So that's really how I like to think of it. It's kind of an easy way. The first thing, when you're starting to try to brand your brand, is to really decide what it is that your message is, what it is you stand for, what it is you're all about, what you're passionate about, and what's important to you. So more than just I'm here to make money selling my products, it's, what you really want to say to the world with your brand, and, be able to promote things that I felt were important, like women empowerment and mental health and all of that stuff. So that's sort of what I think about when I think about, what it is I'm passionate about more than just, creating products to make money. It's what I really want to do and what I find is important when it comes to my brand. So these are just some of the art that I've done a little bit that I think kind of illustrate that. So like I have my You Should Smile More design that's really about feminism, and when people tell you to smile more, you're just like, no. And then like the middle one's kind of about mental health and how everybody can feel like they're going to have a breakdown sometimes. And then the right one, I really wanted to present and promote empathy and relating to others and being able to have a community where you can do that and feel like it's okay to be yourself. So those were things that were really important to me when I was starting to come up with my brand. And after you sort of define what's really important to you, you can ask yourself these questions to really help figure out more and really help define that message that you have. So you can ask yourself, what do you want to really accomplish with this brand? If you wanted to make some sort of change, if you wanted to just present, something you felt inside that was important to the world. For me, I really just wanted to accomplish creating a community and be able to explore all of these emotions that we have as human beings and allow people to really relate to other people through my artwork. And that's just a really important part of what I do. And then another thing you can think about is what you want people to relate to your brand when they think about it. So a good way to do this is just like thinking of adjectives that you want people to think of when they think of your brand. So like my brand, I'd want people to think about, it's funny, it's relatable, it's, full of like badass women, it's, a little retro, all of that stuff. So just, creating a list of just adjectives you want that you want to come to people's minds when they think of your brand is really helpful in defining what you want to make and what you can do to sort of make that happen. Another really important question to ask is who your audience is. So you can, think about age, you can think about gender, you can think about specific hobbies or interests that people might have, or their lifestyle. You can think about their views and beliefs or like their location in the world. Just really getting down who is it that you want to target as an audience will help you define your brand. So for me, my audience is basically me, like people like me, and that makes it easy because I can just think about myself and just like think, well, people who are into spooky stuff, people who are a little alternative or something like that. So just really writing down, what your demographic is really helpful in figuring out, what things to incorporate into your brand. And then the last thing, about your message, I would say is just figuring out what makes you unique, what makes you stand out. Because that's very important to set you apart from the rest of, the brands in the world. So for my brand, I really like to think about, my use of humor or sarcasm to deliver these sometimes edgy messages or like deeper messages. And then just creating content that sometimes people are really afraid to talk about that I can just put out there into the world and that people can really think about and know that people also feel the same way they do. So I feel like those are some good questions to get you started on what it is your message is for your brand. And then, so the other part, other than defining your message, is just creating your style. And, a lot of this is just what you're into visually, like what your inspirations are. You can study other artists that you like and other brands that you admire to see what they do that, is working for them. And then the other thing I've done is collect lots of references on things that I like, see, what I like and how I can put that into my branding and my style. And then I think the other thing about creating your style is just making sure you have cohesive themes and subject matter that goes into it as well. So some style inspirations for me, you can make like a little thing where you gather all of your inspirations and sort of see what these things have in common, see what you can use to make your brand cohesive. So I love horror movies, I love romance comic books and pop art, pinup girls, and retro advertising. So I've sort of taken all of these style inspirations and used them in my own work to try to create my own sort of interpretation of the inspirations that I love. And that's just sort of what style is just taking, the things you love in the world and trying to create your own spin and your own interpretation of it. So another thing that I felt was really helpful when I was starting out and doing branding was to research sort of other brands that I loved and what it is that they were doing that I thought was really effective and what I really gravitated towards. So these were a couple of brands that I thought really did great at their branding, or I loved and really helped me. So on the left, there's this brand called Sit Girls that they just have a really good sense of their demographic and the people they are, sort of catering to, which is, kind of alternative girls. And they, have all their shirts are very, similar style. They would all work for the same girl. They did a really good job with that. And then the next two is this brand called Yeah Studio, and they take a lot of like Japanese and anime inspiration, but also a lot of comic book inspiration as well. And they've used like the same sort of design elements in their branding, the same colors and everything, which I think worked very well. They made everything really graphic so it pops out. The next brand that I really took inspiration is called it's Wizard of Barge, and they have a really unique sense of style, I think, which really like sets them apart from everyone else. So they do a lot of like dungeony kind of stuff, which is really fun, but they make it really colorful and poppy. And they've used all these like really bold colors so that it's very eye-catching. And their subject matter is always very similar and cohesive, which I think is really great. And then the one on the right is this brand called Boss Dog, and they just have really done a great job, with showing their products to the world. I think they have, these cohesive colors. They have, their style is very consistent throughout the whole thing, and the design elements they use in each of their photos is very similar. So these are all brands that I thought did a very successful job with their branding, and I thought I could use some of these elements in my own work. And you could do this with any brand you like. You could do it with local brands. All of the mentors here have lots of really good branding and a good way to show off their brand. So just studying the way people do that and finding what you like and what you don't like too is a very good way to figure out what you want to do for your branding. The other thing that I think is really important is just collecting inspiration and references for your own work. So you can do that, all over Pinterest, on social media. You can, keep books, magazines, or comics, taking your own photos wherever you go of things that you like that, if you see like a sign somewhere that's really cool and you like the way they've branded that, just take a picture. If you see, a business somewhere, just take a picture, because that can really help you figure out what it is you want your style to look like as well. And also just collecting things like toys. I've got like a lot of art toys and things like that. Childhood memorabilia, just whatever. Just collect the things that inspire you and help you to sort of cultivate your own style. Themes and subject matter are also something that I think are really important to make your brand cohesive as well. You don't want the things you draw or the things you make to be all over the place, because then it sort of makes it harder for people to know what it is your brand is, or it makes it harder for them to relate to your brand. So it's good to have a consistent, set of themes you like to explore, a certain, set of subject matter that you like to explore, so that you don't throw in stuff that's like way left field. Because then people are just like, what are you doing? I don't know what you're doing as a brand. So I think just being able to stay consistent is really important. Now we can talk about visual and written branding, which are basically the two parts about branding that you really need to worry about. So with visual branding, that's really just everything you see when you look at a business, when you look at a website for a business. It's how a business visually presents itself to you. And then as far as written branding, that's everything you read when you're looking at a business. It's like the captions in the social media posts, or captions in the product descriptions. It's just everything written, everything, spoken when it comes to words about the business. So like a couple of important things that go with visual branding is your logo is probably one of your most important things, because that's how people recognize your business. The color scheme that you use is also very important. I think it's something that really is able to make your brand cohesive. And then your website and social media, if you're doing a lot of online sales, if your business is really focused on online, that's something that's really, really important. Being able to have an exciting looking website or social media platform that is very consistent and branded toward your business. And then product photos are very important, and just like design details, which I can go over a little later. It's just all of the, designy stuff you use. And then as far as written branding, I have sort of a tagline that I use with my business that I think really, brings everything together. That's all the captions, the product descriptions, and also we're going to talk about elevator pitches as well. This is my logo. With your logo, I think the very most important thing to remember is to keep it simple and keep it legible. With your logo, a lot of times people want to put everything in there. They want to put they want like a skull and then like flowers around it, and then like some cross swords behind it, and then just like everything. They want to throw everything in their logo, and that just doesn't work. You want your logo to be recognizable from, far away, from close up, from anywhere people are looking. So the more simple and more legible you make your logo, the easier it is for people to recognize it. So as far as my logo, I just went very simple. I did, tragic girls in a cool font, and then I came up with a little lightning bolt symbol. So it's very legible. You can read it, from far away. And then, there's different ways you can do your logo. You can do, just your brand name in a cool font. That's easy. That's simple. When you're starting out, maybe that's just what you want to do, but you want to make it recognizable. And then if you want, you can also do like a symbol logo, which is sort of where I have the lightning bolt. And, you can do both for, maximum recognizability. It's always fun to have a little symbol that you can put, whether you're doing like a little, like if you have a bio photo or something, you can always put your symbol in there, or like with your website, you can put it on the top. And it's just something fun and artistic that people can relate to. And then with my logo, I wanted to keep it, in the same color palette. So it's all hot pink. It's all, poppy and out there. And then I have all these different versions that I can use as far as different circumstances. Like, I have the main logo, which is the one on the top that I use like on my website and everything like that. I have a couple different color versions. I have some with some, design elements. And then I have just the little lightning bolt, and then like a shorter version. So it's kind of cool to have, um, you know, different kinds of different variations of your logo to keep, you know, to use in different circumstances. It's been through a couple different phases, my logo, I think. So when I first started, it was just kind of typewriter font and it just said Tragic Girls. And then I also had like a little crying eyeball. Um, and then I used like sort of a mirror with a crying face in it. And a lot of those were, I think, that was better suited for when my brand was a little more like black and white, and I did a little more like film noir inspiration. But then I sort of kind of tried to really figure out what I wanted my logo to look like. I know I wanted it to be poppy. I know I wanted it to look, um, you know, sort of like comic book inspired and really be readable and really people really have people be able to pick it out and like recognize it. So I sort of ended up with this. I just got this font on Adobe Typekit, which is a pretty, I mean, that comes with any like Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, and that, you know, you're able to use their fonts for your logo and stuff like that. So just, you know, trying to figure out what fonts are cool, or, you know, you can draw your own font too if you want. But so that's sort of where I went with my logo. Logos can evolve. So even if you have one idea right now, you know, it might change later, and that's totally okay. You want somewhere to start. You want to start with something, you know, put it out there. If it's not as successful as you want it to be, you can change it, and you can, you know, it can evolve with your brand. Now we can talk about color. Color, I think, is a great way to sort of make your brand cohesive. It's something you can use, you know, in all aspects of your branding to make it, you know, to make people relate to it and understand that it's yours. So I sort of created this color palette that I use in everything. So I have the hot pink, the light pink, black, and white. And this isn't to say you can't use other colors. You can use other colors, like that's totally cool. But it's really nice, I think, to just have a color palette that you can go back to and use for everything, and it just makes everything look very cohesive. So like I use it on my website, which is right here. That really makes everything look like it goes together. I've got the hot pink behind everything, and pink there. And then I use it in my booth as well. And it really just makes my booth stand out because it's like pink and black, and that's like really poppy. And it just makes everything look really good together. Your website and social media are super important part of branding, especially if like you want a big online presence, which is sort of what everybody is doing right now because it makes everything accessible to everyone. Um, so I've spent a lot of time sort of trying to make my website look cohesive and make it look like what I want people to relate to my brand. I have I try to make all of my products look really legible so you can really see what's going on, which I think is really important. You know, some people can put a lot of stuff in their pictures and then you don't really know what you're looking at. So like for my prints, I put them all in like a sort of mock-up frame, which is a really easy way to show prints on like a website. And so it all looks very cohesive. They're all black frames, so it's, you know, working with my my color palette, and it also goes with all of my artwork as well. And then with like my pins and like accessory stuff, I sort of kept it, you know, with a sort of like balance between masculine and feminine. So I have like the leather background on the pins, and then I have like pops of color on some of the other things to, you know, kind of draw people in. But again, it's really staying with the same kind of color palette and staying with the same, you know, themes that I try to do in my work. And, you know, I did use other pops of color in there with the blue. So that's like that's totally cool if you use other colors. But just trying to keep it just as consistent as possible. And then, my shirts I show in all the same way. I do the little like pink little explosion thing in the background. Um, and I just, try to use the same colors, try to use, everything as consistent as possible. Like that is the one word you should remember when you're thinking about branding is consistency. Because that's, I think, the most important part. Um, and then, I use like banners with the same kind of color concept and everything like that, and using fonts that go with that retro vibe that I like to do. um, and then on the right is my Instagram, which is another super important part of branding is social media. So basically you just want everything to look consistent. You want everything to look like, the same types of people would wear it or, use it or have it. You want it to look like just consistent. So color usage, themes, um, just all of that so that it looks, like a consistent brand. And then another important part of visual branding is product photos, which I think a lot of people can overlook, especially when you're getting started. Um, so I know when I started, I really didn't put a lot of effort into my product photos as much as I do now. I would definitely just throw a print on the floor or something and like on my wood floor and take a picture of it, which can be cool if that's like what you're going for. If you're going for like, a nice woodsy or like minimal like vibe. But just make sure that you're thinking about that when you're taking product photos is what goes with your brand, what you want to present to the world, as this is my brand, this is what's important, this is the vibe that I'm giving off. So for me, I always wanted to use like really bold colors. So I definitely started, finding really poppy backgrounds just around the city and taking photos there. And I also have a nice camera that I use. I know that's not like something that everyone can have, but the better photo quality you have, the easier it is to read what is in the photos. And it just makes it look a lot more polished, and a lot more professional. So just really just being able to make it look as nice as possible and, have it go with your message and your style. So yeah, I just use a lot of different colors. I try to use sort of alternative looking models because that's sort of the person I'm trying to, sell to. And then I also try to, incorporate some kind of girly things that I can also make look edgy as well, because that's kind of, oh, that's sort of how I present my brand in a lot of ways with trying to, promote women empowerment and everything like that. I like to, add some sparkle here or, add flowers, while, the image is like this cool motorcycle lady. Like, so it's just kind of a juxtaposition, but I think it works really well. So just really thinking about what you want your image to convey, to make it recognizable to your brand. And then we sort of have design details, which is just like I've got these like cool little jagged edges that I use in a lot of my branding, so it's sort of a cool graphic element that you can use anywhere. I, put a lot of effort into like every aspect of my branding as much as possible. So like when I do orders, I'll try to make everything super branded. I use, pink envelopes to put everything in. I put little stickers in everything, which is also really cool because people love stickers. And it also can help get your brand out there too, if they put like your sticker on something, if it's cool. Um, and then like with my shirts, I have this label that I tried to make really branded and kind of fun and quirky. So it wasn't just like a boring t-shirt label. I really wanted to inject some of that, fun into something as boring as a label. So I have it in hot pink, I have it say wash with your tears because, I like drawing sad girls. So, and then I have my business card as well, which is just, using those same design elements, using those same colors, and then just trying to keep it poppy and super legible, super readable. And then I also have like these little cards that I put in with all of my orders. Right here, that's the Tragic Girls Crybaby Club, and then you can like write your name in it and become an official member. So just like having little details like that that make your brand fun and make people really excited about it, is a really cool way to like keep people coming back. Things you want to keep in mind when you're writing is the tone of how you're speaking. So if you have a fun brand, you're not going to want to sound clinical or something when you're writing, text for your brand. You're going to want it to match the tone of your brand. So if you have, a fun brand, if you're making like kids clothes or something, you want it to be fun and young and, just match that. You also want to keep in mind your audience, what they can understand, what relates to them when you're talking to them. And then you want to keep in mind the message of your brand. So, if you have a certain message that you want to get out to the world, just keep that in mind as well. So I use a tagline in my written branding, which is just one sentence, really short, really simple, that I use in advertising, that I use in little bios or like very short descriptions of my brand. And that is art and apparel for tragic boys and girls. So that's my little tagline. And it's just something really short, really sweet that you can use for many different things that just really tells what your brand is. And then, so another part of branding, the written branding, is your captions and product descriptions. So these are really easy to forget about. So captions, when you're maybe on like social media and stuff, when you're writing your captions for what you're posting there, that's something that you really want to, give people the right tone for your business. You really want to just like make it match. Another important thing, especially when writing captions for like social media and stuff like that, things that people just zoom on by, is to keep all the important info that you want to share in the beginning, which I think it's really easy to write like a super long novel and put like, important stuff at the end, but people don't ever read that. So keep everything that you want to share in the beginning, and then just make sure that it matches with, the tone of your brand. It matches with the audience. It's just really, it's a representation of your brand. So you want it to match. And you also want to keep it interesting. So with product descriptions, especially, it's really easy to just write all of the like item details and specifications with something. But that gets boring. People don't want to read that all the time. So that's definitely something I didn't put a lot of emphasis in the beginning, was product descriptions. I definitely put just item specifications. And that's important to have, but in order to really sell your brand and your product, it's it's fun for people to be able to read something fun in describing what the product is and what your brand is. So now we have the elevator pitch. It's basically just a short sales pitch about your business that you use to try to spark interest in your brand. So you want to get people excited about your brand and what you're doing. It's usually about 30 seconds to 2 minutes. You don't want it to be too long or too short, so people don't know what you're talking about. And basically, elevator pitch comes from like the length that you would be in an elevator with someone, that you could tell them about your brand. So that's why it's, that sort of length, and that's why it's called an elevator pitch. But this just really allows people to understand your brand and connect with it and connect with what you're doing. My elevator pitch, it's something I can use and change for different situations. So I have sort of like a blanket elevator pitch, which I can use and then change depending on what the situation is. So mine is kind of what I said in the beginning of class. So it's kind of like, hi, I'm Katie. I'm the creator and artist of Tragic Girls, which is an art and apparel brand, which is inspired by retro comic books, movie posters, and pop art. My artwork and designs sort of blend the nostalgia and style of retro art with a more edgy and dark humor, and all while promoting things like women empowerment, social equality, mental health, and being able to relate to others. So that's sort of what my elevator pitch is, and I can modify it for different situations. But when you are creating your elevator pitch, the important things to, this is why the elevator pitch is important. Okay, so it really introduces people to your brand and allows them to connect with your brand and what it is you are doing. It can also be used to gain sales. So if you're in a situation where you're like, talking to people, if you're selling things like at Craft Lake City or like at other conventions or things like that, you can use your elevator pitch to explain your brand to someone and explain why it is they should support your business. And then the other thing that it's very useful for is for job opportunities. So if you have a certain project you want to work on, if you want to work with somebody, if you have a job you're vying for, you can use your elevator pitch in order to explain what your brand is and really get other people who could be working with you really excited about your brand. Writing your elevator pitch. So there's a couple of questions you just really want to answer in your elevator pitch. So the first is, what is your goal? So your goal could be any of those things I just talked about. So it could be, getting a new job. It could be just, explaining your business and getting people excited about your business. Or it could be, for the purpose of, gaining more sales. So you just want to sort of figure out what it is you want to accomplish with this pitch. And then the second thing you want to keep in mind is just, what does your business do? That's what you want to explain. Because people don't know, you want people to get excited about it. So you really just want to explain what it is you're doing here. And then the third thing that I think is really important is to put in sort of what makes you unique. Because when you're hearing, people talk about their brands, it's hard to differentiate between different brands sometimes, or you just want to be able to set yourself apart. So you want to tell people why it is they should support your brand, what it is that makes your brand unique and different and exciting to them. And I think the most important part when you're writing an elevator pitch is just to keep it engaging, keep people excited about it, and keep it real. When you're using your elevator pitch in, a situation, you might not use it exactly how you wrote it out. It might sound a little more businessy or something when you wrote it out. But I think you just, in the moment when you're giving someone an elevator pitch, you want to just keep it authentic to yourself and to your brand. And you really want it to just represent you and your brand and get people excited about it. My introduction to branding was really over social media because I eventually learned that the more consistent your images were, the more consistent the message was that you were putting out there, the more successful you would be on social media. And that sort of seeped into everything else. So when I really started, putting out similar work, that's when, I started getting noticed more, and I felt like people were really responding more to my brand. So I sort of learned it from trial and error, but, sort of looking at people around me and seeing what they did as well to be more successful in branding, and just realizing that, keeping a consistent voice and keeping a consistent message and style was really what I saw people being really successful when they started doing that. I like to use the same, content, the same kind of, subject matter again in all of my work. And then I try to make, the style, the artistic style look similar so it's recognizable rather than just putting my name on the front. So yeah, consistent visual aesthetic. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So like I'll use, characters that are similar, or the way I draw, something is similar so you can recognize that it is mine. I know branding is kind of just something you just kind of do and experiment and figure it out. So, it's just something you got to think about. So I do have mostly a horizontal one. And then I do use sort of like the lightning bolt for different ones that are just like more square, or the one that says like T and G for more square. But it is a good thing to have different sort of logos for different instances, because not everything is going to fit in the same like square or rectangle. So that's definitely helpful. So you don't have to, make something new if you need to fit your logo in a square box. That's definitely something that's very helpful. Yeah. I don't. I put it on the label. So it is there, but I don't. That's not really. I want my art to be the most important part rather than, my brand name. So I really think of it like as an artist perspective. So when I'm creating a shirt, I want the design to be the most important part. And then I just put my brand name on the label so people do know that it is mine. When you're a brand, everyone knows that you're just trying to sell your products to make money. Like that's a given. You really want to set yourself apart from just that. It makes you also more passionate about your business. I think if you have a message, if you have a passion you want to get out to the world, then it's just like it sort of makes it more of your baby rather than just, a business that maybe you don't care as much about. So I think it's just really important to, have that message, have, stay true to yourself when you're making this brand, because it makes it all the more worthwhile in the end. It makes it really like a part of you that you are sharing with the world. And I just think that's like really fulfilling, honestly. When I started, it was a personal Instagram and I was just posting art on it. And as it sort of grew, I changed it to specifically a business account. I definitely think it's a good idea to just have a business account and a separate personal account when you're making a brand. Um, if you're an artist, it can be, some similar things. You can definitely share parts of your life to make it more real and more authentic. I think that's a plus, honestly. But I think having an account that is just dedicated to your brand is really important, and it allows people to better understand just the brand. I'm not sure there is an aha moment because I feel like it's sort of a journey and you're always sort of evolving and making changes or deciding what's better for your brand. Um, there was definitely, I guess there was a moment when things clicked, which was probably, maybe a year in when I really, figured out that like branding is actually really important and it can really, help with your sales and it can help people understand your business. So I really focused on that more, and it it really helped with my success, I think, with making a cohesive brand. So probably about a year in was when I kind of started to figure it out. So it's a process, and like I don't feel bad if it's not all clicking right away, because it definitely didn't click with me right away. It was a whole journey. So just try to stay true to yourself, and think about these things, but understand that it can change and evolve as well. I think, I mean, that's a hard one because as an artist, you definitely like to experiment and like to try new things. But I think when you're dealing with a brand, the more consistent you can be, the better, because that's just how people relate. That's how people recognize your brand. And you can experiment within that. You can, as long as like you keep the same style, maybe. I think that's a really important part, is keeping the same style. Um, because if you're, putting out like a beautiful like pointillism painting one day, and then the next day you put out like a graphic ink drawing, people are gonna not know what your brand is about. And so that ultimately hurts you when it comes to your brand. So just trying to experiment within a certain confine, I guess, that you create, that sort of makes it the same style and keep with the same message.